Yeah, I'll tell you, Jerritt, this screams of GWAT. The planning. Hello and welcome to the Brothers and Sisters Like These podcast. I'm your host, Brother E. Today our guest is Jerritt Lynn, Director of Membership of the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Jerritt, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, brother. I really appreciate you reaching out and getting me involved.
Absolutely. The pleasure is all ours. So please give the viewers some background into the IAVA.
Yeah, absolutely. So Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America was started back in the early 2000s. You'll notice by its name, unsurprisingly, it was born out of the Iraq and Afghanistan conflict. I will say real quick, just as a note, although we are Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, the organization is open to all veterans, regardless of what branch, regardless of what conflict, or even if you found yourself only serving in home station. We're here to advocate on behalf of all veterans, not just those in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Great point. Let me just interject here because you guys are the most current organization and new quote unquote organization, but you have a very large following and footprint. So it is very important for everybody to understand that you are all inclusive and all encompassing. And although it's Iraq and Afghanistan, the heart of it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is about veteran and military advocacy.
Exactly. So when the organization was started, I think it's born out of many of the same reasons that other veteran service organizations were started. And it's that conflict, that generation, it's different than the ones that preceded it. World War I, you had the fight for the pension. World War II, big piece of, the Montgomery GI Bill. And then, of course, the Vietnam veterans really fighting for any sort of recognition and inclusion back into society. So then you fast forward to, Iraq and Afghanistan, and it's a whole new generation, especially from, the Vietnam veterans. My grandfather was a Vietnam veteran, and we had a lot in common. But there's a lot that separated just generationally by age, the type of conflict, the people that were fighting in the conflict, and just our technological environment and what we needed. So I guess a great example would be, veteran healthcare. That doesn't change over time, but how it's implemented changes over time. So if we're looking at, care that is done via telehealth, very different community engaging in that, I would say, where our generation is probably far more likely to take advantage of that, whereas previous generations either didn't exist or it's not necessarily within their wheelhouse. So finding ways, to really change and engage within policy and legislation so that it adapts with the time and with the generation of the latest conflict.
And so tell me a little bit about who, for example, your main representatives as your CEO. Talk to me a little bit about your board. You have an interesting board. Let the viewers know a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we have a lot of experience within the staff, to include our CEO, Dr. Kyle Ann Hunter. So we're actually just coming up on her 1-year anniversary of being a CEO. So her background, she was a Marine Cobra attack helicopter pilot, and she will talk about it, day in and day out. Once a Marine, always a Marine. But really, what she also brings to the table, besides a career, deployments to Afghanistan, and being a female Cobra pilot, just all that entails versus, a male dominant career field, is she is a doctor. So she has spent a lot of time in the research environment, in the education environment. And that's really, I would say, energized and reinvigorated kind of the way forward for IAVA and how we engage on policy and legislation, which really helps professionalize the work that we're doing, and helps support, the voice of the veteran that we utilize to humanize the policies and legislation that we're trying to get across the finish line. Well, you did bring up the board too, right? So yeah. General Petraeus, retired, obviously, worked in the head of the CIA as well. And then we had former Veteran Affairs Secretary Shulkin, who is on the board, who, if you're on social media, he's out there loud and proud. Even though he's not in charge of that organization anymore, he is still fighting day in and day out on behalf of the veteran, and leading the charge alongside IAVA.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Jerritt. Now, tell us a little bit about what the IAVA's mission, its core value, what its beliefs are behind its mission.
So this is the big differentiator, because there's a lot of nonprofits out there that support veterans, and there's the kind of the standard bearers, as far as like the American Legion, the VFW. But again, there was a need for something different, and I think that's where IAVA really has a niche, in that we're not service oriented, so we're not focused necessarily at the local community with building, wheelchair ramps, or providing, that type of housing repair for, a disabled veteran. Where our focus is policy, legislation, and practices that need to be changed and updated. That way, veterans, their families, and writ large, the communities that house them are better off. So it's really about empowering the veteran and their voice and their experience, and then translating that into meaningful and purposeful legislation. And I'll give you a quick, stat that I like to throw out to people. Veteran representation in Congress right now is about 18%. If we go nationally at the state legislature, then we're looking at close to 14%. So the people that, have the mandate of enacting laws don't necessarily have the experience or the expertise. So then it falls to us to find a way to bridge that gap between the individual that experienced, combat, or they experienced service, and then the laws that are actually going to support them in the end, and bridging that gap that way that's meaningful and purposeful. Because, I'm sure most of the listeners, have had a boss at one point or another make a decision. If they don't have the experience, it's 50-50 on whether it's going to be a good decision.
That's right. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like, well, some of the other organizations that are more established in terms of time on target in the community, we tend to see them more at the tactical and operational level, but it looks like the IAVA is more of a strategic level in terms of looking at a bigger picture. Is that a fair way to describe it?
I think that's a good way to look at it. We were born out of New York, I will say, but Washington D.C. is where all policy is essentially enacted and reformed. So I joke that all roads lead to Rome. So we do spend a lot of time focusing there, but part of Dr. Hunter coming on board, as well as myself, our vision for the future is not just being a federal organization. We want to be far more nationally involved, and that's where we're going to start growing, I would say, our action at the state level. Still not necessarily the tactical involvement, but at least if we're looking at, echelon, going from federal to state and being involved far more there.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that a little bit later, but that's very exciting, and I think good news also, just as a strategic view of yourselves as an organization, because so much is left on the table at the state level. And believe it or not, to the listeners, I know you know this, but so much from the state level can end up pushing at the federal level, because so many states, especially to veteran issues, can come out with some non-traditional or just kind of outside the box thinking that then can elicit a response at the federal level. So, a lot of good work is done in these individual states, and the IAVA is I'm very happy to hear that you have this forward-looking way of top-down, getting a little bit more into the operational of the states. And we will get into that later, because that's exciting for us here, especially here in Western North Carolina. All right. So some of your mandates and your bread and butter is, for example, some of the largest population growth among veterans is female veterans. So I know the organization is very keen on making sure that women veterans have proper and updated healthcare access. Along with that, there are other things such as fighting homelessness and drug addiction, some problems that veterans have a higher percentage of being subjected to, unfortunately. And so I understand that the IVA is very keen on those. Is that something that I'm tracking correctly?
Absolutely. In 2020, the Deborah Sampson Act was passed, which was great for promoting, women veteran health care. And to that point, another great statistic, the fastest growing demographic within the military are female veterans. So we need to make sure that they are inclusive in whatever policies and legislation are being put forth, whether that's Department of Defense, writ large at the state level for veterans, or in any other capacity, because they're the ones that are the what's the word I'm looking for? They're also the highest percentage of recruits right now as well. So you can't discount the role that women play uh, in our armed services. And to that point, we do membership surveys to ensure that we're getting up to date feedback from the people that are part of our organization. And overwhelmingly, it's men that are responding, just because proportionally we do have more men members because there are just more men that have served. But over 70% support equitable healthcare. So they support uh, in increasing access and comparable access to healthcare from active duty to VA healthcare, because that was one thing that uh, really surprised me once I retired, was that it's not standard from active duty to once you retire on what you're provided, services wise, which just is astounding to me that there's not continuity of care.
That's a great point. That's some of the strategic thinking that you guys provide an organization, which is very important, which is something that we can't do at the state and local level. So that's great. And also, specifically on the women's veterans health, is that they require an additional level of specialized care. So it's not just equitable care. It's also it's not culturally part of our society to embrace the female veterans as we have, male veterans in the past, because that's simply not something that the majority of the population is used to. But fortunately, I see that the IAVA is wants to change that and press that, because it is a very important key goal of all of ours, not just of your organization. But also, the military that we have today and the veterans they have today is not necessarily the military that we'll have tomorrow. Demographics change, and it's very good to hear that you guys are keeping up to date with that, and that you have a culture within the organization and its members that is willing to not just think about themselves, but much like the military does, think about the overall team. So I'm very happy to hear that. And just to wrap up this thing of kind of your mission and your ethos, so veteran healthcare, economic stability among veterans when they get out. Tell me a little bit about the SIV program, the special immigrant visa for our mostly Afghan allies that were left behind in with the withdrawal. And we already talked about the women's, and then also you guys are very keen on civic engineering. So if you could talk about those two points.
Yeah, so the top two concerns, I would say, unsurprisingly, amongst veterans are probably the top two amongst the American population, and that's healthcare and then economic opportunity. So as far as economic opportunity, there's a lot of great training, vocational and otherwise, that takes place within the military. But as far as transferability, once that individual transitions out, is not uniform across the board, and it goes back to the state issue, right? Federal government may recognize, but Arkansas may not, and Missouri may. So it's really trying to push some reform so that it eases the burden, not just on the service member, but also on the corporate entity that is looking for the easiest path for that service member, to be employed. And real quick, I just want to say, that goes back to the role that I would say third parties play into to everything dealing with veterans, because you have the veteran and you have the federal government who's charged with providing, the policies, legislation, and then the funding. But there generally needs to be some sort of implementing partner. Excuse me. Sometimes, yes, it is a government agency such as Veteran Affairs, but a lot of times it's a corporate partner. So we need to make things as easy for them as well, so that they can help take care of the veteran and provide the opportunity for them to use the skills that they've already learned and upskill, as opposed to veterans in the workforce either being
Settling
employed
for
but underutilized,
right, settling for
and
what they can. Yeah.
and the military spouses too. One of the highest unemployment rates are military spouses within active duty, and if that's the case for active duty, it's going to transition into the veteran community. You can't bifurcate active duty and veterans necessarily when it comes to economic stability. There's a very short line between veteran and active.
Yeah, and that affects the military spouses, the family. That all affects the quality of life of the military while they're on duty, while they're active duty, but also as veterans, right? So that affects the quality of life. That affects how much business opportunities, local governments can enjoy. So it is very important, and I'm super happy and glad that you guys, as opposed to some of the other traditional organizations that have rightfully so looked at other topics more relevant to their eras. I'm very happy to see that you guys have some pretty unique and very specific key points that you're working on. So thank you for explaining all that. That sounds very interesting. And now I'd like for our listeners to know kind of, how did you get involved with the IAVA, and tell us a little bit about your role and also about your military and civilian background.
So originally from Bloomington Normal, Illinois, so born and raised in the Midwest, but also couldn't, get out of there fast enough either. So, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. But growing up, military service was a part of my family. My father's side, my great grandfather, he served in the Marines during the Pacific Campaign, World War II. Spent 36 months over there as a machine gunner. Purple Heart, malaria. So I grew up hearing his stories when he would share. On my mother's side, my grandfather spent over 20 years in the Army. He was in Germany post-World War II, helping root out Nazis, the tours in Korea and Vietnam. So I grew up hearing his stories, when he would share. And then, my father served in the Army Reserves as well. So it definitely was, it was a part of my upbringing. I knew I was going to join the military, I'd say probably since the age of 10. One, to be like, my great grandfather, and father, but also part because that was probably the most economically viable path for me to be successful. College really wasn't at the forefront of an opportunity. It was, military service. And this was before, 9/11 and the wars had kicked up. I knew that was my best opportunity to beat feet, out of cornfields, and, the onus on me to kind of make something of myself at that point. So, I enlisted at the age of 17. I was, don't hold it against me, I came in as military police. Everyone, everyone likes to dog on the MPs, and rightfully so, because I'll tell you what, it feels like there's two types of personalities: either the people that, really loved the power at that age, and the other group that were probably people that got in trouble when they were younger. And, it seemed like maybe it could provide a career after the military. So yeah, as an MP, deployed to Afghanistan, deployed to Iraq during the surge, so did a 15-month tour there. Things were starting to wind down. I wanted to stay in the military, but I hated being a cop. I wasn't a good cop. By that, I don't mean like I was doing anything nefarious. I just meant like every day was dealing with someone on their worst day. And that
I get it. Yeah.
that wasn't in existence. I could see myself doing, day in, day out for decades. So I was like, all right, what else is there? And I still wanted to deploy. I didn't want to be stateside. So I looked at the special operations side, saw civil affairs, and saw that it dealt with a lot of a lot of work I had done as an MP with engagement at the local
Right.
level,
Yeah.
but then it was far more government focused, which, I was interested in politics and history and international relations. So it seemed like it might scratch that itch. So went to assessment selection and, made it through. And then, 7 deployments later, eventually found myself able to retire after 21 years this last October 2025. So I'm still fairly fresh out of being out of the military, but a lot of experience, and I didn't want that to just go to waste. I know a lot of people take it, put it into a drawer, and move on to something else, but I still felt a calling, and I still wanted to find a way to serve. So that kind of, goes into the how I found myself with IAVA. So I
Okay.
originally joined the organization um, as just a core member, signed up online, and then I was on LinkedIn while going through my transition and saw that they had this cavalry program where you could apply, interview, they would conduct some training, and you would actually go up to DC and advocate on behalf of veterans. At this point, I didn't know what my job was going to be getting out, but I knew I needed that bucket to be filled, that service, that to wake up, if I'm filling out spreadsheets for my job, I know that wasn't going to be life affirming. So besides taking care of my family, I knew internally I was going to need something. So I applied, uh, was accepted, I did that, and I was hooked at that point. So I was looking for other opportunities. So I was doing it for free. So if that tells you anything about the organization, I was doing it for free. Now
Yeah.
I appreciate being on staff and getting paid to do it. I mean, it's a lot more
A lot
lucrative
better. Hmm.
instead of just doing it. But yeah, I came on as a volunteer advocate, and then through my work, some people on staff saw something in me and wanted me to come on and work for the organization and try to take it to the next level. I would say.
Okay. So you gave, first of all, thank you for your service and your parents, or your father and grandfather and great grandfather service. It's incredibly rare in our society to have so many generations of service members, but it's incredibly important. And so we honor your service and as well as theirs. So thank you for that. I wanted to say you mentioned this cavalry, and there's also a fellowship program. So that's kind of the meat and potatoes of what you do. So please describe those for the public so that they understand what your organization offers.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, our membership, there's no dues. That's another thing that is a differentiator between us and other organizations. So then, if we're not getting money out of our membership, what's the point in having it? And I'll tell you, it goes back to that stat of 18% veterans in Congress and 14% state legislature, because we need people with the experience of having been a service member and are now a veteran to utilize that experience and utilize their own expertise, whether it dealt with the service or whatever they're doing now as a civilian, and use that to advocate again for good policies and legislation that makes sense, because you can enact all the laws you want, but if it's not going to be beneficial to the end user, to their family, to their community, then it's not good law on the book. So that's really what it's about being a member. It's about coming on and trying to be an agent of change. So there's different ways to do that. Again, you don't have to pay anything. Come on the website, you can sign up, and then at that point, again, we're an all volunteer force. So we need people to come on the site and sign up. That way, honestly, we can put you to work, because that's what I'm looking to do. I'm trying to build a network across the country of veteran advocates. That way, we can do right by each other. So at the base level, you sign up. You'll get a newsletter every month, and we try to make it as easy as possible for people, because not a lot of people have time. Not a lot of people can travel. So in the newsletter or even on the website, we'll have different calls to action. One of those being, hiring Military Spouses Act. So then you can just click a link, take you to the website. You can find who your congressional reps are, and then send an email right there. So that's low hanging fruit as far as being involved and being like, okay,
but it's that
I know
easy, right? It's just
it's
that easy. And you guys are doing that, having that conversation, which is good because other organizations, we do a lot of stuff, but not necessarily direct engagement like that. So I like that. So it's very, for us GWAT that are still working, raising a family, you guys at the IAVA are providing a way for us to, on our own terms, still engage. So it just being a member is not time or money, inclusive.
Yeah, and I try and look at it from a leadership perspective, right? Like, okay, I have these people who have experience, who have expertise. They signed up, which inherently says that they took the time, that they want to be involved. It is now my job as a leader to give them an end state, to give them a goal and a path to achieve it, and then what they can do to achieve it. Starting with the easiest step that takes the least amount of effort, all the way through, being, a leader on our behalf within their state. Uh, so that's kind of the core membership right there. And then, it kind of depends on involvement, So if we know there's a parade happening in Minneapolis, then we'll let our members know, hey, this is going on. You should go out there. If there's a town hall, hey, this is going on. This is policy that we support in your state. If you can go out there and voice on our behalf, great. Or if you're an expert in a field and you want to lend your voice, I think a great example was Senator Duckworth's office reached out to our organization asking us to review some language that was going to be proposed dealing with VA home loans. So then we reached out to people that we know who are realtors and work in that space. That way they could lend their expert opinion. How many times are you going to get asked like, hey, I want you to review this because this could be national legislation or policy and you have a chance to affect it. So that's opportunities that we provide our membership. Now, going beyond that, for those individuals that are really looking to give more time and to potentially be leaders, we have what we call the Cavalry Program. So this is a once a year program. We start taking applications generally in the fall, October timeframe. We'll do interviews, and then once selected, then we do virtual training through the winter. And then about the last week of February, first week of March, there's generally a joint session of Congress. So at no cost to the individual, we will fly them in, we'll wrap up our training, and then we set up meetings with congressional reps and their offices. That way they can work as small, 3-4 person teams, and they'll have a team leader take them around, and they'll actually lend their voice, their experience to the priorities that we've identified, such as, supporting Afghan allies or, healthcare reform or transition. Now, that's a great week, but it's not the end. That is the beginning of their advocacy journey, because the intent is for them to go back home and then continue to do that, whether it's in Florida or Texas or Ohio, people that we can lean on to meet with reps, within their district, whether they be, federal or state legislature reps supporting, their fellow veterans. And then from that point,
Jerritt,
sorry,
let me step in. No, you're fine.
I'll get on a soapbox and, I'll just keep going.
No, you're fine. You're doing great. And it's really an eye-opening discussion here. So, and for the viewers, what's important to remember is that we have, state and federal representatives within our states. So through an organization like the IAVA, we are supporting our, rights and our future, not only through the state level, which can accomplish some things, but also at the federal level, because then they go back to Washington and work as Washington, but their home is in each individual state. So this cavalry program seems incredibly important to motivate IAVA members, but also an incredible link to kind of perhaps bridge the gap, bridge the divide that can be between, as you noted, the 18% of only politicians with prior military experience, and our generation that right now is not as active in the veteran advocacy because we've been treated better than Vietnam veterans, thank God, and we're still active family and in the workforce. But this is an opportunity that sounds incredibly important. And I'll mention for a state like ours in North Carolina, specifically in Western North Carolina, where is our home base. Post Helene, we've been tragically hit and we're still dealing with the consequences. And our North Carolina Department of Military and Veterans Affairs, Secretary Millett, who's also a veteran and like you comes from multiple generations of family service, is extremely proactive in reshaping veteran and military care in North Carolina. And so I see huge opportunities. And from speaking to you, it seems like you want your mandate to revolve also around how you can maximize these connections, because it seems to me that if we can maximize as an organization connections at the state level, especially for the representatives that are federal, it will have a great success at the federal level in Washington. So this seems like a really good opportunity that I'm excited to hear about.
Yeah, well, and to that point, before I get into the fellowship, you know, if the federal government continues to divest any responsibilities or funding, or if they keep cutting personnel from the workforce, the need doesn't change. It just falls to the states and the local community. So
Good.
you
Yeah.
don't want to wait until, something falls on North Carolina, assembly to then start building a relationship with your representative or with their staff to try and get support. You need that. You need that network. You need those relationships. You need to build those, before you need them.
Before you get into the fellowship, and I'll piggyback off what you said, just the listeners know this, but to express a similarity in our views here. Our organization, Brothers and Sisters Like These, was created by Vietnam veterans who were still dealing with PTSD many, many years after. And I, as a GWAT member of Iraq and Afghanistan, came in, and what I realized that was this was very beneficial to me personally, therapeutic writing and using the arts to kind of talk and write about the things that I could never talk about or speak about out loud. And it was incredibly therapeutic to now be able to engage on those subjects and be an advocate for others. And what I realized was that as these Vietnam veterans are aging out, their legacy and all their work risks being lost. So I felt upon me that kind of sense of duty that you've described to earlier, especially post military life, about what can I do to keep this legacy going on. And I realized that I and organizations like the IAVA need to be here for that next generation of warfighters that comes home and already has some kind of infrastructure that's been worked on. Because like you just mentioned, whether it's at the state or federal level, it's too late to have those connections going. So I totally understand that train of thought, and I just wanted to share the likeness on.
Yeah, and it does transcend conflicts and generations, right? The PACT Act, which is one that, IAVA helped get across the finish line, that supported Vietnam veterans. And I can tell you right now, it's going to support veterans from our, current military operations in Iran. So it's not just about, okay, in this moment in time and the people that served, it's okay, how does this relate to past generations? But what kind of environment are we setting up for future? Like we know the problems that we had, and if we're still continuing with those, like that's why would we want to pass that on to the next generation of veterans? So for me, I mean, that's even more of a reason for the fight, right? Like it's incumbent on me, because otherwise, if they're essentially fighting the same thing that I was, then
we haven't made any
doing?
progress, right? We've lost an opportunity. We lost, generational knowledge and institutional knowledge, and that's exactly where I'm at. As soon as I saw, therapeutic value in these programs and these organizations like yourselves, I said, well, if we just let this train go by us, when passengers need to get on, no one's going to be staffing it. So this work needs to be done so that we just don't think about ourselves, but we think about the future. And you guys are totally on board with that. So let's get into this fellowship program. Is that the level up even higher than cavalry?
It is. It's the next echelon. So, especially my time in special operations, I used to always tell my guys, like, every day is assessment selection. Like, never rest on your laurels. What are you doing today? So that's part of how we, derive who's probably the best candidate for the fellowship is by watching our cavalry members, not just what they're doing in DC, but when they go back home. Are they still engaged? Are they trying to push the envelope? What actions are they taking? And from that, again, this is an annual program, but it's more intensive. It's set up like a college semester. So this one, as far as application and interview, this takes place during the summer period. So we'll actually be kicking this off here in July. The cohort will actually run from September to February. It'll be all virtual, but along with our own curriculum, just as far as making sure individuals have the requisite leadership skills, policy, latest policy information, because it's always changing, as well as how to lead teams and develop plans. We also are running it concurrently with another credentialing program so that when they come out of it, they will be certified as a nonprofit professional as well. And again, this is all at no cost to the individual.
Excellent.
And then once the cavalry cohort, because they do overlap, begins, those fellows will help lead those small teams through the cohort, build their relationships with them, help mentor those new cavalry members. And then when the fly-in takes place, late February, early March, those fellows come in and they're the ones that actually lead the teams. It's not staff, it's those leaders, those fellows taking over. And then again, once they all go back to, home station, then those fellows are more or less, our touch points, our leaders at the state level. And then it is incumbent on them to start building their state plan and then engaging the cavalry and other IAVA members at that level.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Jerritt, this screams of GWAT. The planning just screams. Like, unless you're experienced in the military, especially the way I know our experiences were different than other eras and stuff because technology and just combined arms. But I'm telling you, if anybody has any experience in the last 20 years in the military, the way this is set up is like the poster child of military planning and execution, and it just feels so right and so well thought of and done. I'm just so excited to hear that it's clicked with somebody at this level how important to have a good intentions is, but to actually have a plan and how to execute that plan. It's kind of where it's either you actually get results or you don't. It's fine to have good intentions, but it's amazing to see the results. So the way you've just set it up is just an A to Z of continuing the military. So good for
and all props go to Dr. Hunter for allowing me the time and space to trust me to come up with
this vision,
a plan. And it's again taking everything I've done for the past 21 years and okay, well, I know it can work. How do we implement it back here in the States? And I think it can happen. I think we can provide an avenue for a lot of veterans to feel empowered and involved in change that directly affects them, their families, their communities, and future generations.
Okay, well said. So give a little plug for any items that are on your direct forecast. I know you guys have screened and are looking for possible future screenings of American Solitaire, and name about that and any other events that are hot on the radar.
Yeah, so myself and Dr. Hunter actually just wrapped up some screenings for a film, American Solitaire, in New York and LA. And it's a great film in that it is thought-provoking and it forces conversations. I'm not saying everyone's going to like every part of the movie or agree, but the best thing that we can do as a veteran community is come together and actually have some hard conversations when it surrounds, transition, when it surrounds gun ownership and safety, when it's mental health and suicide, because there is no, one right answer. All right, there's a lot of gray area, but the only way we get to a better solution, especially when it comes to the amount of veteran suicides, is by having the conversations and figuring out ways to implement incremental change. And our call to action that was tied to the film was the Saving Our Veterans Lives Act, which provides lock boxes and locks to veterans for their firearms. So it's not there's nothing fighting against the 2A community. It's just about safety, not just for yourself, but for anyone who might be in vicinity of the firearm as well. So that's one example. But American Solitaire, we do have the opportunity to partner with organizations, veteran organizations especially, for free screenings, because the idea is to have that conversation. So after the screening in both New York and LA, Dr. Hunter and one of the actresses in New York had a Q&A with the audience, and then in LA it was with the director and Dr. Hunter. So I would love to have one out in either central or western North Carolina, and have myself and you as
Absolutely.
the moderator, and
Sure. Yeah.
engage the population of veteran community and what they liked, didn't like.
Well, we here, I've had as a guest before the Asheville VA's suicide prevention, and our is the only dual 5-rated hospital, civilian or VA, on in this area. So we beat out Duke and Chapel Hill. Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. So we're extremely fortunate. And talking to them, looking at statistics, like, people would be amazed if they were to find out, if you were to put a friction point, as we call it, one friction point between gun access and suicide ideation, such as a lockbox or a gun lock, something like that, it dramatically increases the survival rates of veterans who, in a fit of desperation, just need that few seconds to stall them. And I didn't realize how impactful something like that was. So we're always offering gun locks, even cleaning mats that talk about veteran suicide. Again, I think we completely here in Western North Carolina, brothers and sisters, agree. It's not a 2A discussion. It's simply discussion about enjoying the things that we used to do and making sure that it doesn't end in another suicide of veterans. I think that's great, and we would love to facilitate or have any kind of viewing in this area. Like I said, our secretary here for the state is extremely proactive in looking at solutions to address military and veteran needs, including non-traditional, such as therapeutic writing, dancing. We combine the two. We'll write and have professional dancers execute like black box dance theater. And so there's tons of ways to address. And I think, like you said, we don't always have to agree on everything, but I think if we have a conversation, then it opens the doors and possibilities. And I'm very happy to see that you guys seem to be like that as an organization, maybe non-traditional in the sense of, hey, let's just figure it out. And I think on the website you say, just don't be a jerk, right? that's your only thing, right? Let's keep it civil,
We're still veterans. I mean,
right, exactly. Let's keep it some fun and some relaxed. Let's not take it too seriously. Okay, great. So,
and one other plug I will give, especially with it
yeah.
being May and Memorial Day coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So a big thing for IAVA is what we call our hashtag Go Silent campaign. And you can sign up on the website. It's out on socials as well. And it's a pledge to go silent on Memorial Day, 3 p.m. Local time, wherever you're at. And when you sign up, you can say why you're going silent, or who, or a group of people you're going silent for. And then we ask that you share that, because the only way people are going to remember those that were lost is if we put their names and pictures in front, in front of them and keep them there front and center. So, the general population remembers the sacrifice that has been borne by a lot of people.
I will be a keynote speaker for Memorial Day at our
Excellent.
state cemetery here. And one thing as a board member for Brothers and Sisters that I always do is I always make sure we honor Gold Star family members, mothers, daughters, spouses, because they've given the ultimate, especially the mothers. The mothers to me is the number one person at the table. And I, talking to a friend, Gold Star Ann Atkins, whose son died while I was in Iraq. He was also a parachute infantry regiment, but we weren't in the same unit. But just didn't know him. But found out years later. His mom's here and part of a Blue Ridge Honor Flight, which goes to DC, and we just connected. And her thing is that they're not really gone if their memory still lives. And I can't tell you how strongly I believe in that. And so on our website, we have a legacy page that anyone can leave a space for their friend or loved ones. And I'm very glad that you mentioned actually picking somebody that you care about, because you're right. We're only a generation away from everybody forgetting the deaths that we've had. So I can't tell you how happy I am to hear you specifically mentioning that we really is incumbent upon us to keep our brothers and sisters that passed away alive in our memories and engage them in the public discourse so that politicians and the community at large understands the price that service comes with.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to, the concept that, everyone experiences death twice, once when you die, and then again, the last time your name is spoken.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, Jerritt, I'm going to give a couple calls to actions. Found out a lot about you guys, a lot of exciting things. Basically, a call to action that I want from my listeners is, regardless if you're a GWAT, Global War and Terror era veteran like myself or Jerritt is, go on their website, look at engaging. A lot of times it seems like we engage on more operational and tactical levels, and this is something strategic that is incredibly important and that I don't see any other organization offering in this same way. And it is forward thinking. So if you fought for your cause, let's think about the future generation of warfighters coming in behind us. And I would say engage in any way that you can with your organization, because it seems like the costs are absolutely zero, and the time asked to engage is based on whatever you're available. So please, to my listeners, I'm going to put all of the contact information, post-production on the website and on this podcast. So I ask that you engage with this, because this organization here, these types of organizations are the future of veteran care and veteran advocacy for our warfighters. So, Jerritt, our time has come to an end. And as always, to our guests, the last word.
I really appreciate you, brother. This has been phenomenal, and I look forward to really building a coalition. 1% of the population, veterans, right? Like, none of us can do this alone, so it takes us all working together and rowing in sync to make the change that we all deserve.
All right. Jerritt from Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Thank you for your time, and to the viewers, see you at the next one.